when he got to know that students are available only on Sunday, he said, no problem, I will continue on the same day. Since previously our plan was to meet Monday, but then there will be only teachers. So that's where he has made it a point to come and deliver a talk just after landing to India. So we welcome you, sir, and really I'm very much thankful to you for accepting this invitation, and I'm sure we have started a baby step on the technologically enabled education, and all this young generation is looking forward to continue with the same thought, and they would definitely be contributing to the field. So as you have expressed, you would like to see what are the collaboration possibilities. Certainly they all will make it sure that they will be interactive. As I shown you, there are so many people again connected online. So I'll be helping you to handle the interactions with them. So hand it over to you, and thank you. So you can put this headphone.
Hi, sir.
No, but then it will be comfortable.
This? Okay. Oh, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just put it in any pocket.
Okay.
And
Okay. There's some more. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Can you make sure that we can see the full screen?
No, that is shared.
Yeah. Oh, it's shared. Okay.
So
Okay.
That is not an issue.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, just that.
Camera,
Okay.
and that is shared different.
That's fine. Okay, so hello everybody. Hi. So as was just been explained there, I've flown in from Manchester in the UK. That's where I live. So I've not slept for the last 30 hours, and so I dropped my luggage and I've come here. So in here is my secret to staying awake, which is Tetley tea bags. So I have a cup of tea here with Tetley is they've made tea bags for 150 years, and they originally started in Huddersfield. Okay, so it's Huddersfield tea I have in here. Okay, so so I'm going to chat with you today about the area that I really care about most, and in fact I'm writing a book about this at the moment. I don't want to just talk to you for an hour though, so what I want to do is have your thoughts. I want to have your ideas. So I'll start talking about things, but then as I'm going through, if you've got any questions, please ask, and I might ask you some questions as well, so please answer. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so the title of my talk is about personalized learning. Okay, so personalized learning is basically about looking at learning from the perspective of each individual learner and how they learn. And I'm going to also talk about a concept that I've developed called educational fluency. Okay, and you'll hopefully, on the back of this, start thinking about how you study, how your friends, family study, and things that you can do differently based on thinking about this. Okay. So what I'm going to cover is, three main things really, which are what the challenges are with our current educational model that we use predominantly around the world. We use the same model and it's been in place for a couple of 100 years. And there are lots of challenges with that model. Okay? The next area I'm going to cover is about the challenges we have in studying in a digital world. So, for example, today we've got a set of people here. Yeah, it's okay. And we've got a set of people remotely. And we've got microphone difficulties. So, how do you manage that? How do you manage having people in different places? How do you manage learning in a world that's changing very rapidly now? And then from there, I'm going to propose some solutions to these challenges. And I'm also going to talk, because it's relevant to what I'm talking about before this, about some of the things that we do at Huddersfield, because you can see then examples of this being applied. Okay? Okay, so let's start with the current educational model. So, the educational model that we have is a model that was developed about 150, 200 years ago. And it came out of the need for a small, educated workforce that were then able to oversee the production of lots of materials. So, for example, one of the things that India and the area where I live, sort of the Manchester area and the Huddersfield area have in common, is textiles. Okay, textile manufacture. So, for different periods in the last 200, the key production areas for textiles have been northwest of the UK and India. Okay, and those production of textiles were still are, but were significant parts of the economy, certainly the UK economy, up until even this century. Now, for that production, most of it was done in mills. So most of it was done by people just working in a manual job. And they needed a small number of people that could manage the budgets, that could manage the processes related to large-scale economic production. Okay? And the model of education they used for that was a similar model to the production model in the factories. It was effectively factory model of education. In the of educated people, because there are lots of jobs to be able to do the job. It's not a manual job for most people anymore. Okay, so the problem with the end that they needed at the time, now we need a larger number coming through. So the model isn't really enabling enough people to this. What it also does, because it's based on reaching a certain level, and or what it's based on is differentiating, so having the top 5%, the top 10%, because it's very much about differentiation, about having people who are seen as different. What you end up with that is you end up with a very demotivating model, because if most people by definition don't succeed, most people don't pass, most people don't achieve, then their view of themselves is affected by that. They see themselves as a failure. Okay? And if we need lots of people having these skills, then it's a really bad model to have. Okay, so the final point on here is that if you look at let's look at where India is at the moment, okay? So India is going to very soon become the most populous country on the face of the planet, okay? Now, as part of that, what it needs to be doing, and hopefully will do, is it needs to develop its economy to ensure that that population lives in reasonable prosperity. Okay? All right? And that's not a straightforward position to do. If you look at what China's done, for example, it's taken 3 decades of almost perpetual large-scale growth to get to where it is now. Okay? So, what India needs, amongst many things, is a skilled, educated set of people like yourselves here, okay, who are able to innovate, develop new businesses, reform processes, develop new ways of engaging within your country to grow the general prosperity of the country. And this is about large amounts of people. It's not about small amounts of people doing this, okay? And it's also about not necessarily traditional skill sets. So it's about things like cybersecurity, like new ways of marketing, new ways of engaging through e-commerce. Okay, those sort of areas where you can get quite significant growth in economic terms compared to traditional businesses. So if you look at the biggest businesses in the world now, most of the biggest ones are Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google, okay? They're all computer e-commerce related businesses, yeah? And for them to be successful businesses, the skill set required for that is educate people like yourselves, yeah? Okay? Okay. Okay. So why have I put this picture up? Hurdles? They are hurdles, correct? So why have I put it up? What is it telling you? Right, so on a path of learning you have to face different hurdles. Okay, all right. And what you'll notice here is certain people hitting the hurdles, okay? So coming back to the point I was making earlier, if you think of the normal traditional educational model, it's this model, okay? It's the model of exams, okay? And then you have to get over that hurdle, and then you move on to the next hurdle, and then you get over that hurdle, okay? Now, a question to ask yourself, which we'll hopefully answer in a bit, is that really the most effective way for you to learn? No. Okay, there we go. Easy answer. Right, we'll go through and explain that in more detail. Okay. Right, so let's think about this next bit, okay? So the next bit is looking at education against where we go in our careers afterwards, okay? So there are 3 basic models of education, okay? There's a model based on human rights, okay, which is basically says education is a human right, everybody should have the right to be educated. Okay? The second model, which I prefer, which we'll come on to in a bit, is the capability model of education, which says that education is there to develop people's capabilities. Okay? And the third model of education, which is what this is about, is the human capital model of education. And that is linked with what I was talking about before, the industrial approach to education. So basically what it says is society or a country, let's take India, wants to develop its economy. For it to develop its economy, what it needs is an educated workforce, or a percentage of its workforce educated. And therefore the role of education is to equip those graduates, so university graduates, with the skills required for the economy to prosper. Okay? And that is the function of education. It's not to develop a person, it's not because they're entitled to education, it's because that is what the country needs. So that has a lot of things associated with that viewpoint. So for example, in the UK, what that's led to is increasing reliance on metrics, measures to assess whether that output is being provided. So whether universities, whether schools are educating sufficiently for the output for society. Okay? So then education becomes less potentially about the individual learner and more about are they reaching a certain level. Okay? And one of the other things that has occurred in the UK along these lines is that education and employment, tied in with careers, education and employment have been linked. So for example, if you're looking at universities in the UK, they all get assessed for their employability. They all get checked for their employability. Okay? And I'll explain where we are in Huddersfield on this. We're doing very well. Okay? But all of them get checked on that. They get checked, do your graduates go into jobs after they finish their degree? Okay? All right. So, from that viewpoint, what should happen is education should be done at various stages, school and university, and then you go into careers. Okay? And that's what should happen. Okay? But what's increasingly happening is the education and the careers are becoming disconnected. And they're becoming disconnected because the careers are changing and changing quickly. Okay? And this education flow going through from starting school to finishing university, taking you 15 years. Okay? So it doesn't make sense necessarily for your education in those 15 years to equip you for the jobs that are coming up 15 years after you start your studies, okay? And particularly with the current models of education, that's a real problem. It's a real problem, because what's happening is we're getting an increasing disconnect, like this actually, really, between what students learn in their education and what they will need in their work. Okay, so I'll come back to these in terms of solutions in a bit. Okay, so let's just do a few more challenges, a few more things to get you thinking. So here's some of the key things that are current challenges with you studying and interacting in a digital world. Okay, now most of the people in this room, unless they're all of them, most of the people in this room have grown up with a large amount of interaction with technology or awareness of technology. There's been a lot of things that you can access. Okay, so just taking as simple as phones, mobile phones, and access through there, access through the internet. Okay, when I was at secondary school before going to university, we didn't have we didn't have access to the World Wide Web. Okay? In fact, maybe only when I was, 21, 22, were we actually accessing the World Wide Web regularly. Okay? So, whereas you would have done it when you're much younger. Okay? And that's a big difference. And as part of that, you've also got lots of other things that impact on that. So, for example, the way you socialize now is significantly different to the way previous generations did. And there are significant social impacts of that. Okay? So, one of them is, because there is more interaction at a distance and less face-to-face interaction, there's a psychological distance from your actions. So you in general will behave differently online to how you would with a person face-to-face. Okay, so a trivial example is cyberbullying. Okay, there are far larger amounts of bullying through cyberbullying now than traditional forms, because traditional forms of bullying require interaction between parties face to face, right? Where bullying you can hide. Okay? So there's real challenges in terms of how we interact socially in a digital world, when actually this is something that's fairly new to all of us. So we've actually not learned how to do this effectively, and we're not necessarily designed to do this effectively. Okay, so there's some really big challenges in the next 10, 20, 30 years on that. Okay? Another big challenge is in particular. The first of these is that you are now in a position to access any information you ever want to find. Okay? You don't need to know very much anymore. You just need to know where to find it. Okay? So you've got a different approach to finding information to previous generations. Previous generations would generally be taught the information, which I'm going to come on to in a minute, about how lecturers and students interact. Okay? But you'd have to go and find it in books, you'd have to read about it from a small number of sources, you'd listen to it on a television from a small number of sources. Okay? Now you can get it anywhere. And now you can get it through social media and through websites, okay? And there is no filter on that. There is no easy way to identify credibility of sources and to identify where information comes from. Provenance, it's called, where the information comes from, okay? So there are big challenges and big responsibilities on you studying now to be better at filtering information, finding information, accessing and judging information than people previously need to do. Previously, you could take a lot of this on trust, and it's much harder to do that now. Okay? It's a lot easier for misinformation to spread. And that becomes very dangerous because, if you take a country like India, you could easily end up in significant political unrest from stories being spread digitally that are either untrue or are manipulated. Okay? And you being able to judge what's true and what's not is really important in trying to manage that. Okay? Right. Okay, so let's just go on to the last one, which sort of extends the point slightly, which is what's happening now, if you're a university lecturer, and certainly this is happening in the UK, is the role of the lecturer is changing. The role of the student's changing, but the role of the lecturer is changing. And the role of the lecturer is changing because lecturers used to be the fountain of knowledge. They used to be the person that can tell you all this information. You get it somewhere, and it was very hard to access that information. So basically, they would have all this knowledge in their head, and they'd be able to tell it you, but it would take you longer to find it yourself. Okay? Whereas now, they can be talking to you, as I am now, and you can be looking up information as they're talking to you. You can check their information as they're going along. Okay? So what's the role of the lecturer now? Yeah? So the analytical view, did you say? So what do you mean by the analytical view? Okay. Okay. That's very good. That's very good. Okay. Right. So let's ask another person a question and see if they can get as good an answer as that. I'll come back to yours in a minute, but I want to ask another question first. Okay. What's the purpose or what's the point of doing a university degree? Why do you do a university degree? Let's see if somebody can get the answer to this.
Seal of approval. It's like a seal of approval.
It's a seal of approval. Okay, it's a qualification. It's a reputational stamp. That's why a lot of people do it. Okay, that's not why you should be doing it. Okay, but that is what it is. Okay, why should you be doing a degree? What is it that a degree provides you with? No, you can't. You've already got 100%, so you don't need to. Let's see if somebody else can. Why would you do a degree rather than a training course? What's the difference? Okay. So that comes back to sort of the reputational stamp. It gives you a seal of approval. It gives you a stepping stone onto the next thing. So yes, you definitely get that. But you could do a training course and do that. What's different? What's the difference between a degree and a training course? That's a very easy way to ask the question. Okay, but that's again the reputational thing. So we're answering the same. Okay, so if you were listening to what he said, the answer is linked to what he said, which is why I asked the follow-up question. Okay, go on. See if you can get it. If you can't get it, it's not a problem. I'll answer it. But go on, try and. Why? Yeah. So why do you do a degree? What's the purpose of a degree? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Knowledge, sorry, what? In the right way. Okay, so it's an approach to learning. Okay. It is an approach to learning, but that's not what the answer is. Okay, so I'll give you the answer. Okay, so the reason you do a degree. The reason you do a degree is because a degree teaches you to develop an informed viewpoint. Okay? So what do I mean by that? What I mean is you're able to work out what's reliable and what's fake, and you're able to take that information, which you're right, it might be you've got that from people who've got experience of years of doing that, okay? But you take that information and then you're able to make judgments of it, okay? So the difference between a training course and a degree is, if you've done a training course, you're able to do certain skills. If you've done a degree, somebody can ask you a question, you can go and find out the information, you can weigh up that information, and you can then say to them, well, this is what I think, based on this, this, and this. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay. So, coming back to your previous point there, okay, about the analytical side, okay? So if you think about where we are now, for the informed viewpoint, the information the student can find themselves. Yeah? So you're right, the lecturer is there to provide that guidance, to provide that route to processing that information in the right way. Okay, so how to analyze it, how to check its validity, its credibility, to test it, all those techniques. Yeah, excellent. Okay, right, good. Okay, so there you go, you know what a degree is now. Okay, so I'm just going to go through briefly some of the research either that's out there or that I've been linked to that links with these things, to just give you a bit more detail on the things I've gone through. And then I'm going to go on to where we go going forward from here. Okay, so there's a lot of challenges in terms of socialization online, okay? So I touched on those already. And there's some real opportunities there as well in terms of how we provide effective support for learners in the modern era. Also, how we think about distraction, okay? So one of the key challenges, certainly in the UK now, is that because there is technology that you can access and in fact encourages you to access it very regularly, all the time, it pings while you're in lectures, whatever else, okay? Your attention span may not be what it should be, okay? And that whilst you can multitask, you can absorb lots of things at the same time, you're not actually learning as effectively as you could do. So if you look at how we learn, if you're in an environment where there are lots of bits of technology that can distract you, you're not optimizing your learning. Okay, you might have access to more information, you might be potentially able to learn more, but you probably won't learn more. Okay, so there's lots of work to be done there, and as I said, I'm writing a book about this at the moment. There's also another issue there which I'm not writing a book on, but is equally a big issue as we go forward with technology, which is about addictive tendencies, about compulsive behavior, about how technology is encouraging repeated access. So, for example, a trivial example is selfies. Okay, what are selfies? Well, selfies are people, at least in some cases, taking pictures of themselves to post to get feedback. Okay, so it's self-affirmation. It's about, I, as a person, am only a person if other people give me feedback through an online medium. okay? Which is a pretty weird place to be, okay? But that's where we are now, okay? And so there's some real challenges going forward. As I said, we're only just developing these technologies, and we don't really understand their impact on us at the moment. But your generation afterwards, we've got some real challenges there in terms of both the things that are happening at the moment and the unintended consequences of those things happening. Okay? So, for example, if people's confidence levels reduce because they're constantly seeking affirmation, they're more likely then potentially to have mental health conditions. You're going to get larger amounts of depression. You're going to get less functioning in society and less people achieving their full potential. Okay? So something that may seem quite innocent could actually have some quite significant consequences. And we've already touched on bullying. Okay. So one of the things that I've done some research on previously, which is which I'll come back to in terms of educational fluency, is the idea of working together in teams, working together in groups. Okay? So one of the technical terms in the field is called communities of practice. So basically, groups of people working on something together. Okay? And yes, that can be online, but in a lot of cases, having physical interactions is still an effective way to do that. So I'll give you a simple example to illustrate this point. How many of you exercise? Hands up, please. How many of you exercise? Very few. Okay. 3 or 4. Okay. Okay. Do you go to the gym? Those that are going, yeah? You go to the gym? Do you go on your own or do you go with other people? You go on your own? Alone? Alone. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay, so if you want to go and exercise, so that large majority that don't exercise, okay, if you want to go and exercise, one of the easy ways to encourage that habit to develop is through going with somebody else. Okay? And in fact, I was on Saturday morning, actually, before I flew here, I was in my local gym, and I was chatting with 2 ladies there, and they're getting fit at the moment because they're going to go on holiday. And we had this exact conversation about one of them wasn't going to go to the gym that morning, but the other one was going, so then they went because the other one was going, and vice versa. Okay? So the point being is, there is an attraction, a pull, a momentum, a way of pushing you forward through working with others. Okay, so effectively it provides an additional support route, and that can be in going to the gym, but it can also be in learning. Okay, so there's a lot that can be done, not just in terms of necessarily online social support, but also in terms of connection between groups of people. Okay, and things like support from your family or from your friends is really important, and how much you integrate. So there's quite a lot of work, for example, within the field of retention about how it's important to build social groups when you start studying, because that can pull you through difficult times, whereas going on your own doesn't. Okay, so those that are going to the gym on their own, you're doing very well, very determined, well done. Okay, but that's harder than it would be if you go with somebody else. Okay, so just quickly going through on Bible data and fake news. Okay, there's a few issues here. One is that if we look at information going out into the World Wide Web now, particularly social media information, so tweets, for example, or even social media posts, there's a need for instant response, and that need for instant response is exactly at odds with credible responses. Okay? Because in a lot of cases, to provide a credible response, you need to spend some time looking into something. Okay? You don't do your assignments by posting a reply. Yeah? You spend time reading around the subject, thinking about it before you express a view. Okay? So there's a real challenge there in how we check those responses and how we react to events. So, and there's also an indicator that almost the speed of response may be potentially inversely related to how credible it is. There's also a big challenge about what voices are listened to. So what we tend to do in social media situations is we tend to listen to our friends and family, and we tend to trust them. Okay? Well, actually, okay, we do trust our friends and family generally, but their viewpoints are very similar to ours. So all that social media really does is from a sort of an awareness and political perspective, is it amplifies your existing beliefs. Okay? So it's not a medium in which you question and get exposed to other cultures, other understandings very easily. Okay? So if we're not aware of that, when it comes to, for example, discussions on particular issues or particular subjects, we're not necessarily getting informed viewpoints. So coming back to the purpose of a degree, we're not necessarily getting informed viewpoint. And unless we're aware of that, we're self-biasing, effectively, what we're doing. Okay, couple of more things that relate to your studies. One I've already touched on, which is the idea of provenance, so where does stuff come from, basically. And it's becoming increasingly problematic, given that information can be duplicated, it can be manipulated and reposted. It can be very difficult to identify the original sources of information. Okay? And in particular, to know whether it's trustworthy. Okay? And then beyond that, there's always been bias in information that's out there. So one of the challenges now, though, is those biases are almost becoming more amplified because there's a lot of drivers linked to publication to do with making things heard more. So, for example, a trivial example demonstrating this from quite a few years ago now was there was you might even be too young to remember, quite a few of you, there was a big deal quite a few years ago now about cold fusion. Okay, so somebody had apparently found a way of being able to generate significant amounts of energy, that could basically power the world from fusion at pretty much at room temperature. Okay? All right, now it was a load of rubbish, okay? But these were, academics that had done this, and they got news stories around the world with it, okay? All right? So why did that occur? That occurred because there was a funding imperative. They were looking at trying to get some more funding to do some research. There was a personal and professional prestige and credibility perspective. There was a need to promote what they did, okay? And all of those things were influencing both their credibility and what they put out there, okay? And that's a simple example, but there's a lot of different things that impact on how people broadcast and present information, okay? And particularly your generation need to be as aware as possible of that so that you can make informed viewpoints. Okay, coming back to the point earlier about analysing and guiding, okay? One of the bits of research that I did with one of my PhD students previously was looking at what are the different ways in which students and lecturer interact? And there's different types of power relationship, basically, between students and lecturer, and I'll talk those through in a minute. There's also generational differences, okay? So the tradition, as I said, amongst probably more mature lecturers is to impart knowledge, whereas what's actually required, as touched on over there, is somebody who guides, basically, okay? So that then implies a change to how we teach, and certainly a change to how learning takes place. Okay, so here's two of the areas that we looked at, which were about different ways in which power can be seen between the student and the lecturer. So here's two of them. One is, how much does the student see the lecturer as an expert in what they do? And how much do they see their role and their position with respect, effectively? How referentially do they see them? Okay, so in certain cultures, for example, the person might not be seen as much as an expert post. They will effectively listen to what they say, okay? Whereas in other cultures, UK would be a prime example, there may be less respect for the position in itself, there may be more questioning of whoever the person is, but they may still have respect for them in their expertise, okay? And that impacts then on the relationship between the lecturer and the student. What is a reasonable relationship between those two sides? And this can also change depending on subject matter. So, for example, in the creative arts area, the creative arts model is primarily a studio-based model where it's a master and an apprentice. Okay, so the lecturer is there to watch and observe the student developing their skills, okay? And then to question how they're developing it and to enable them to then become a master in themselves, okay? And that's a different role to a traditional knowledge imparting role of, I'm going to tell you this, you learn this, you do this, okay? And then, as well as the power relationship, there's also things here to do with how the person engages. So how the interaction between student and lecturer links to academic self-confidence. So this comes back to the point we were talking about earlier about barriers and about how people learn. You would develop more self-confidence if you have more empowerment to learn with support, okay? You will also develop more self-reliance, so you will be able to then take more difficult, challenging situations and be able to engage with those than you would be if you were just told everything effectively, okay? And you would also then gain more of a connection with both your lecturer and with your subject matter because you're immersed in it. Okay, so there seems to be from there quite a straightforward way forward, okay, in terms of moving from a lecturer model like I'm doing now to effectively a student-led model, okay? But there's some things to think about along the way. So one I've already touched on, which is concentration levels, okay, which you're probably switching off about, well, you probably switched off about 20 minutes ago, to be honest. It's more than 20 minutes at a time. It's a real struggle to maintain your concentration, okay? Why? Because we're not designed to concentrate for those periods of time. Okay, genetically we're not. Okay, so when we look at learning, we should really look at developing learning that is much more bite-sized. Okay, this is not, for the most part, an effective way for you to learn. It's an effective way for me to tell you things. It's not necessarily an effective way for you to learn. Okay? Another thing to think about, tied in with the distractions and the way that information is absorbed by you nowadays, is do you look at interweaving learning? So basically, do you take some learning from one area and then apply it with learning from somewhere else? Or do you go linearly through one set of learning? Okay? Now, what tends to happen with the modern generation is that you interweave. You'll have a look at something, you'll do something for a while, you'll then go and do something else, you then come back, okay? Now, sometimes that can be really useful because what it'll do is it keeps you motivated, it's something fresh, your concentration stays, okay? But it can also be incredibly inefficient as a learning approach. Because if you're switching your concentration all the time, you're not undertaking deep learning, so you're not able to concentrate effectively to get deep learning, and those constant switches are using up some of your learning potential effectively. So you will learn less. Okay? And the final point really to touch on here is about your capabilities with technology far exceed those of your lecturers generally. Okay? So that should be taken into account within the learning. But the challenge is a lot of lecturers, certainly older lecturers, have got a very steep learning curve to get anywhere near the levels of technical capabilities that you have. Okay? So how do we address that? Okay, it's a big issue. Okay, right, so talked about a lot of the challenges. Going now to a few of the solutions. So the first one here at the top is action learning. So basically, there's a couple of things with that. One is you can use action learning in groups. Okay, so action learning groups allows you to go and do something and then talk through with each other, share and learn from that. Okay. What also it's based on is actually doing something. All right. So giving more of the learning experience to the learner to engage with is key. Okay. You will get more out of it, but it comes back to the point that was made there, which is it still needs guidance from the lecturer. So basically the lecturer's role changes to a facilitator, to a guider. And the key then is how do you most effectively learn? Okay? So one of the things that came up a few years ago, which is effectively based on a similar principle, is the idea of flipped classrooms. And a flipped classroom is you do a set of activity before you are then talked to or lectured about or you discuss a particular topic. Okay? And the reason to do that is because if you have some existing information in your head, you already have some, they're called schemas, ways of seeing information and understanding how it fits together. If you have some schemas in your head already, when somebody introduces some new information, you can access what's already there. Okay? So the amount of cognitive load, the amount of brain power required to absorb the information is less because you already have some existing understanding. Okay? All right, to give you a trivial example, if you drive a car and then you go into another car and you try to drive that car, you've already got a lot of existing learning that you can take across. Okay? So you've got to concentrate on less things. Yeah? and you can make progress with that other car very easily, okay? Now, it's not an exact comparison, but hopefully it gives you the point that if you're learning stuff before you're then discussing it, you're then able to make further progress, okay? Okay. So, expanding on this further and seeing some other examples of this, and we do most of this stuff basically at Huddersfield. This is how we deliver, okay? One way you can gain stimulation as a learner and actually develop skills that you need in careers and in the workplace is through problem-based learning. So you're given a set of problems and you develop it up. Okay? Now, you have to be very careful with problem-based learning because, again, coming back to cognitive load, if you're putting a lot of your cognitive load into solving the problem rather than getting the learning from it, then it's an inefficient way of learning. Okay? So basically, again, coming back to the flipped classroom approach, I guess, you need to have an existing understanding to effectively use problem-based learning. So basically, there are different stages in learning. So first stage would be you learn some basic fundamental knowledge. Okay, so that's rote learning. That's like doing your times tables, for example. Okay? Having done that, you then develop a set of structures, a set of ways of seeing how things link together, okay? That's schemas, right? And then from there, you can then link those together in broader understanding about how lots of different separate things can connect together, okay? And once you've got to that stage, then you can start looking at problem-based learning, because basically you say, okay, I can take these different routes through how I understand information, and I can apply them to this context. Okay, so that's problem-based learning. Project-based learning, again, you can do this individually, and you can do it in teams. It's about giving you not only the opportunity to apply skills and experiences to learn more effectively and to reinforce the learning, but it's also about the discipline and rigor required to complete tasks on time, which you need in the workplace, but you also need in life, okay? So it's, try to see whether that works as an analogy. I guess it's a bit like, you know, if you're going and doing exercises, it's like time-constrained exercises, okay? So it's like, you know, how much of X can you do in Y time? So how many laps of a swimming pool can you do, for example? Okay, it's that sort of skills. So it's giving you an understanding of how you're progressing within your capabilities. Okay, and then this final one is the increasing role of informal learning within learning in general. Okay, so you as a generation now, those that are students, are accessing a lot more informal learning than previous generations, because you're getting a lot more that's out there, okay? And the question is, how is that informing your formal learning, and how is it developing you in your careers, okay? So there's becoming less of a barrier between what you do just as a hobby or what you do outside and what you do in your education and what you do in the workforce, okay? And so for that one in particular, you'd seen on the profile page that was on previously, that was what I was doing down in London, okay? I was developing informal learning content, okay? And basically what it was doing is it was taking all these concepts and applying them to develop materials to engage people in learning. Okay, so what it would do is it would allow you to, and you can go on and have a look at this if you want, it would allow you to do 20-minute bite-sized bits of learning about a particular topic. Okay, so for example, cybersecurity, it teaches you the basics of very basics of cybersecurity. So if you're a school child and you've never heard about cybersecurity before, you could go on there. It doesn't cost you anything. You can go and look, and you can get some understanding of cybersecurity, or you can get some understanding of programming. And then you can take that and you can say, okay, I've got this understanding of programming, I can do this other bit of development of programming. Okay, so it's a bit like taster sessions. Okay, and so what it does is it gives you increased awareness, but it also gives you opportunities to understand what future careers are out there. It gives you a way of seeing whether you enjoy certain subjects. Okay, in a broad range of areas that you wouldn't get in a formal educational sense. Okay, because if you think about how the formal education system works, it's very, very restrictive. You have a certain number of subjects you're taught. You then make a small number of choices of options. And you do it at very young stages in your lives, really, relatively. Okay? And with very little information about the broader environment in which you're doing it. Okay, it's a really big issue. Okay, so part of the point with this was to trying to raise awareness of what's out there, get people to think about things that are different so they can then look and see what they might want to do when they've still got time then to access that. Okay, so I'll speed up now because I've gone on for some time, so I'll speed up. That stuff's all important. Okay, I'll just I'll go through this and then I'll start speeding up on the rest of it because it has been quite a while now. I'm not kept time. Okay, so let me just introduce a few things first, just to go through some further things to think about. Okay, first one is the idea of educational fluency. Okay, so educational fluency, how many of you have travelled abroad? Anybody travelled abroad? Okay, where have you been to? Denmark. Okay, fantastic. Okay, do you speak Danish? Okay, so where did you go in Denmark? Copenhagen. Okay, how did you get on? Through English. Okay, so you had a language you could use to speak, a common language. Okay, but imagine for a second you went to Copenhagen and none of the Danish spoke English. Okay, it would be very difficult. Okay, right. So now imagine going to university. Okay, so you go to university. University has its own rules and regulations, its own way of doing things. Okay, right. You're potentially moving away from home. All your friends that you knew at school. Okay, so you're going to somewhere different. Right? So you could be going to Copenhagen. Let's say you went to Copenhagen to study. Okay, right? So how are you going to survive there? Okay, well, you're going to survive there by developing your fluency. Okay, so educational fluency is effectively the same as developing your fluency when you go somewhere else. So it's about understanding the culture, understanding the language, understanding what's expected of you. Okay? Right? That fluency is impacted by many things. Having a translator or a translation method is good. Having family or friends that can give you advice. So if you've got somebody else who's been at Copenhagen before, they could tell you where to go, who to meet. This person's really helpful. They helped me out when I was there. Yeah? Okay. So that's the idea of fluency. Okay. There are other drivers that influence how successful we are in our studies. So what